Let's start with how did you become a B-17 navigator?
Okay. I became a navigator first because I was a flop as a pilot. When I went in the Air Force, I was like everybody else. I wanted to fly fighters and go out in the Pacific and all. But I was a terrible pilot. I probably washed out in less time than anybody. I think I had 12 hours and 6 minutes on a Stearman, and I did everything wrong. I cross controls, and my peripheral vision wasn't good, and I just was terrible. But I also then as all during my career, I was sick all the time, and so every time I got into a Stearman, we'd take off, and boy, I would mess up the cockpit, and then have to go get a bucket and clean the thing out when we came down. So I was a terrible pilot cadet, and I washed out in 12 hours and 6 minutes, and took the various kinds of tests that they had, and showed that I should have been a navigator anyway, because that was where my aptitude. In fact, that was where what I had begun to think was kind of my thing anyway. And so I became a navigator because I didn't become a pilot. And then I went to the B-17 because here again, when I graduated, I was not the fighting type, and so we were given a chance. We could have a choice of three, one, two, three. You could take training command, or ATC, that is our Army Transportation Corps, or combat. Well, I didn't want to go to war, so I put training as my number one, and so I put combat as number three, and so obviously I got combat. So, and that again is a matter of just time. When you graduated and when you became on the market, so to speak, as second lieutenant navigators, you went where the need was. And at that time, they were putting together lots of B-17 outfits. So one-third of my class went to the 95th, one-third went to the 99th, one-third went to the 100th. And in fact, when the 100th lost so many planes and crews in later months, those people were my friends. Those were people I went to navigation school with, and they all were shot down except one, I guess, and me. It was the navigator, bad pilot, B-17, and the 100th, because that was what the need was for all the time. And as a romantic kid, when I was assigned to the B-17, I was glad, because the 17 was a revered aircraft. People fell in love with it, and it had a great reputation. There were already starting to be movies about it, and it had the reputation of being the safest of the aircraft. So that's the way I went into that.
Could you just restate that? It had the reputation of being.
The B-17 had the reputation of being trustworthy and safe and getting people back. We heard, as turned out to be, it was very hard to knock out of the air. You could lose three engines and get home. You could lose half of your vertical stabilizer on the tail and get home. You could lose one of your rudders and get one of your ailerons and get home. You could literally have a hole in the fuselage, literally, honestly, that you could have a whole bunch of people walk through and still get home. There are all kinds of impressive pictures of the B-17 just absolutely shot up. In fact, when on October 8th, when we came back and crash landed on the coast of England, the home guard who came and pulled us out of this damaged aircraft counted the holes in the B-17, and there were over 2,000 holes from 20 millimeter Canadas and cannons and machine guns. So I was glad to be in the B-17 for that reason.
When you got to England, it was May 31st of 1943, and that made you one of the, what do you call it? Describe that.
Okay, there's a lot of romance and drama and, if you wish, corn to this whole situation, because Hollywood had done a job on the Air Force. They'd done a lot of movies. I Wanted Wings and all of them, with Veronica Lake and her peekaboo blonde hair, and uh, so. To be one of the original, the founding group, that is the original, was a deep honor, and They, as I said earlier, they put us together just by happenstance. But those of us who were the original hundreds, well, then as now, we still are very, very proud of that. It was no unmixed blessing because of the original crews who went over. 86% were shot down. As 14% of us finished. Of the 35 crews that went over, not a single crew finished. There's not a single crew got a whole through the tour, which was then 25. One crew, Lieutenant Dye, he got 9 people through, but they had one gunner. One of the gunners was killed on a mission, and a crew here and a crew there got 3 or 4 through, but only 14% got through. But so on the one hand, it was glamorous to be part of the original, and on the other hand, it was not habit forming.
Let's see. When you got started over there, one of your earliest missions was a trip to
It's
Bonn.
interesting that you mentioned the Bonn situation because it just was my lot in life to be over there a long time and be involved in a lot of activity. But the things that are always about me are the things I did not do. If I am, quote, famous, or if you wish, notorious, it's because I didn't bomb Bonn. And the story is, and it's again, it's the romance and the legend and all. When I found out I was going to be the lead navigator the next morning, I went home and I wrote my letter to my wife and read my letters over and over and over again from my wife. And then I was never apprehensive. It was a job, and I knew I had to do it, and I could usually sleep all right. But I was playing. I had a record player, and one of our enlisted men had made a transformer so we could use the British current and play this American record player. And I was playing, and I'm always kind of I block on the Richard Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. I was playing that, and so I read that Beethoven, who had written this wonderful, wonderful piece of music that I was enjoying so much, and being kind of finding it ironic that it was about by a German composer. But I just happened to read without really recording it that he went to the University of Bonn. Well, the next day at 3 o'clock, I was briefed for the mission, and I was the lead navigator, and there were going to be a lot of airplanes flying behind us, about 700, and we were supposed to bomb a target which was near the Ruhr, and as I remember, it was Gelsenkirchen, but I'm not sure. So we took off and got all the squadrons behind us, and the groups behind us, and the wings behind us, and the division behind us. And so here we were, a whole task force going to Gelsenkirchen. Well, we weren't very deep into the continent till the clouds really began bad, and we'd look down and there would be clear, and then it would be completely obscure, and then it would be patchy, and so I knew I was going to have trouble. So when I got to the proximity of the town, the city, we were to bomb a marshalling yards, or railroad marshalling yards. And as we got to it, I knew I was going to have trouble finding it, so I was looking for it, and my bombardier was trying to help me find it. And I knew we couldn't. We knew where it was, and we could track the railroad track into it, but there was no way that we could bomb the target. So, in those days we had the primary target and a secondary target and a tertiary target, and then we had what they call a if you couldn't bomb number 1 or number 2 or number 3, you picked a TO, which was a target of opportunity, and we had ideas of what that would be. That would be a dam or a railroad station or a bridge or something like that. And we were trained to find a worthwhile target, and at that time, in fact, it was standard operation and procedure. Just take out any town, any city. Just you could take the heart of any town, and that was a good target of opportunity because every town would there be an intersection of communication lines, intersection of railroad lines, and so on. And anyway, so we headed for Gelsenkirchen, and no way could we find it. And so I got out my maps and found out what the target of opportunity was, and I gave them a heading for the target. And so this means that we'd called back to the command pilot over intercom, and out in the clear would say we're scrub main target, select target, the secondary target. So we went to it, and this was another marshalling yard actually. And same thing, no way could we see it. It was even worse. But in the meantime, I had already looked up for the tertiary, and it was worse too. It was completely obscure. And so I knew we had to find a target of opportunity. And so I started looking at my maps, and oh, there was just a great big city. Well, that was a good one. And so I put my Weems plotter on it and got the heading for it, and said this is going to be our target. And I picked out an IP, and all of a sudden we were starting to make the run. And then I thought to myself, well, since we're going to destroy this town, I better find its name so I could put it on my log. So when I would go back and the S2, that's the intelligence officer, would debrief me, I could tell him what we destroyed. And of course, the system was set up where somebody using a camera would take care of the bomb damage and assess the bomb damage and so on. But when I saw what the town was, it was as though I was electrified, paralyzed, because it said BONN. And I thought, we can't bomb this town. So I hit my front mic and said, "Don't bomb this town. This is where Beethoven went to school." And so we went over the town. Bomb bay doors were open, but no bombs dropped. And so we floated over Bonn, and since then I've got letters from people who were in Bonn that day. One person said, "Thank you for not destroying my town," and so we went on to another target, went home, and so after the war, Bonn had been hit some at night by the RAF, but it was the only major city which was not destroyed. So because Beethoven went to school there, that's why Bonn became the capital of Germany.
Okay. Now, you were on the Regensburg shuttle.
Yeah.
What was that
Okay,
mission all about?
the idea of it was we were going right into the heart of Germany, the one that all the people were really going to defend. And they said, boy, whenever you went in that area, they were like hornets, the Luftwaffe. And so somebody got the idea, it was primarily Curtis LeMay, I think, that we would we would send two divisions in, the first and the third. The third would take Regensburg, which was had a whole bunch of factories for fighters, German fighters, and the Schweinfurt was the ball bearing industry. So we were supposed to go in at the same time, and then instead of the first division turning around coming back home, we were going to go straight on to Italy, over Italy, and then down across to North Africa and land near Constantine in the town of Bonn, not Bonn. And so that was the plan, but everything got all messed up. The weather was bad. The people going to Schweinfurt were late, and just everything got mixed up. So there were lots of attack, and we got hit bad. And we were the tail end. Charlie LeMay, Curtis LeMay was up ahead of us in the lead, and we were the end. And we out of the 21 ships that took off, only 3 got there. Some of them landed in the water and were safe, and some of them crash landed. And so I think one went to Italy, and so we only lost about 12 planes, but it was murder. We just got hit all the time. Our plane was really hit badly. The 60 planes were lost that day. It was one of the really big losses.
So say that again.
60 planes were lost that day, so it was one of the heavy losses and the heavy victories for the Luftwaffe. We thought it was tough, but it subsequently developed that really was hard on the morale of the Luftwaffe.
After that mission, you got a new pilot named Robert Rosenthal, and he went out on his first mission, and it was a mission that you also went on.
Mm-hmm.
What happened on
Okay.
that October 8th mission?
Rosie, oh, a great human being. Just a wonderful guy, wonderful sense of humor, generous, nice guy. But and you would think the last person in the world to be the great warrior, but he was truly the 100th Bomb Group designated hero. He ended up with every single award there was except the Congressional Medal of Honor. Uh, Shot down 3 times, 3 Purple Hearts, and so on. But anyway, so he shows up as one of our very first replacement crew. Nice boy, nice crew, and so on. And the first mission he went on was October 8th, 1943, to Bremen. And once again, I was in the lead crew, and we went there, and it was a perfect mission. Our formation was great, but boy, over the target, we were hit badly. The group was hit. The group was decimated. We were shot clear out of the formation. We went down in flames. Our number, I think, was our number 3 engine was on fire, and we were reported as missing. And in fact, they counted they reported that they had counted 6 parachutes coming out. So word got back that Blakely's crew was shot down, and uh, and 4 people went down with the plane. So that meant that the 100th Bomb Group was decimated, and our crews kind of fell back into formation with everybody, and the groups behind. So Blakely's crew, on which I was came back on the deck alone. I can tell you more about it, but it was really a harrowing experience. Well, Rosie was one of the planes that made it. He came home, and so he landed, and so that was his first mission. And then the second mission that Rosie went was the longest mission there was, to Mariansburg. They flew and flew and flew. I think they were in the air 12 hours, as I remember, clear to almost to Poland. And then the next one, they went to Merceburg, and he was the only one who came back. Everybody else was shot down. So on his first 3 missions, they were just terrible. And the story is, this nice guy gets out of his plane and looks around. Are they all like this? And he he was extraordinarily brave, and he went on the worst missions. He probably went to Berlin more times than anybody. He went to Berlin. He was on all the missions. He flew 53 missions, shot down, as I said, 3 times. Just a legendary guy.
When you were coming back from the Bremen
Yeah.
raid, though, you were what was your status considered to be, and what did they do to your barracks?
Well, oh, that okay. Morale was a big problem, and so the minute any time anybody was shot down, they immediately cleared the barracks and uh, and brought another crew in. So when literally it was this abrupt, by the time a crew which had returned had debriefing and ate and got back to the quarters, there would be a new crew moved in. Just bang. You never saw an empty bed. You never saw an empty spot. Well, when we were an hour and a half late, and so they assumed that we were shot down. And the reports was, so wouldn't you know, they cleared and put all my stuff in a footlocker and locked it shut, and took all my blankets, took my picture of Gene and so on. And so when I came back, there was somebody else living in our quarters, and so we had to move them out. But whenever a crew came in late because they had trouble and they came in alone, or maybe had to land at some emergency place, they would always run to their quarters to make sure that their stuff wasn't sent home.
Um, do you remember? Do you remember seeing Rosie return on October 10th from Munster? Were you around?
Yeah, I wasn't
You
at
were.
his. I wasn't. I was actually I because we had been hit so badly on the 8th. Jack Kidd said, take a plane and go someplace. And so we went down to Bournemouth and had a couple of days off with an airplane, which was a real honor. So we came back, and in fact, I was concerned about Rosie. I liked him for saying, and so when I called the weatherman, we had a code system set up, and said, how'd they do? And the code came across that they did very badly. And I said, and we had a code set up for the number of loss, but we didn't want to have a code set up for everyone. So when I said, in code, how are the losses? He said, all of them. So I thought everybody was shot down. So we started home from Bournemouth to get back to the base. And when we got there, we could tell that it was a tombstone. There were no planes. And but Rosie did get home, but he was the only plane.
Did you go on the second Schweinfurt?
No.
Okay. And do you recall? Do you recall Big Week?
Oh, yeah, the 100th was involved in Big Week because the 100th is notorious, and it was called the Bad Luck Outfit, and they believe the Germans had the Luftwaffe had a vendetta against us, and so we went to a lot of a lot of valuable targets, and everybody lost, and I don't remember exactly which one of that was, but that was one of the ones where we lost 8 or 10 planes.
During Big Week.
Yeah, that's right. And we knew it was Big Week. But they again the romanticism. The S2 officers would come in and say, after Big Week, you're going to be home by Christmas. Of course, we weren't home by 2 more Christmases, but it was ballyhooed as the big low and the big strike.
Um, do you remember the first Berlin raids? Did you attend any of
Well, I went to Berlin and bombed Berlin, but not on the very first one. By then, I had finished it was so close to the end of my tour that because they thought if I finished my tour, I'd go home, and I had acquired some value as a trainer for the elite crews, and so I didn't go on it for a long time. When I finally went on, it was for some other reasons. But the first Berlin was a foul up. The weather was terrible, and they recalled the task force, and whether the leaders elected to ignore the recall or what, but they all said we didn't hear a recall, so they went on and bombed Berlin anyway. So when the 95th and 100th bombed Berlin on that very first time, they weren't supposed to be there, but they all got distinguished flying crosses and so on because Goering had said bombs will never fall on Berlin and so on. So when they had the briefing and they pulled the curtain back and the tape went all the way to Berlin, to Big B they call it. Boy, they first it was just stunned silence and then just a shout of excitement of Jewish dread and glory that they were going to go to the big one.
Um, as a navigator, um, as a group navigator, you were responsible for getting the entire group to their target.
That is correct.
So everybody was relying on
That's
your
right.
ship.
That's right. If I strayed at some places, the corridors that we went through where there was no known flag, if I was off 4 miles and a plane got shot down, that was my fault.
So, as the navigator, a group navigator, what exactly were you responsible for, and what did the consequences?
Well, on the ground, I was responsible for selecting the lead navigators, training them, training everybody else. I was and briefing them all. But in the air, I was what was known as a lead navigator, and that meant that I was the one who, as the navigator in the front ship, made all the rendezvous, got all of them together, and make sure that the time we had to get a squadron across a certain place, and then a group, and then a wing, and then a whole division within seconds. So the assembly of 2,000 aircraft was a major thing. But then, when we went across into the fatherland, we had to stay on course because we knew where the flak was, and sometimes the corridors were just barely enough to go through. So if we'd go off course 4 miles, we could lose a wingman, and you could see him go down, and so it was a very responsible position. People asked me if I was afraid during World War II, and I have to say I wasn't afraid. And the reason was not that I was brave or that I was crazy. but rather for the first thing I was always airsick, and I always had some number 10 sacks right here, and I get sick and use these things and put them down the escape hatch and get rid of them. Hope that the sacks landed on somebody in Germany, but also. Uh, the responsibility of my job. What I was afraid of was of messing up, of missing a fighter rendezvous. For instance, the fighters had that is early on when we only had P-47s and Spits as our escort. They could only be with us 5 or 6 minutes. So if we got there late or early, or they'd be gone, the Luftwaffe would take pics on us. So the responsibility was so great that what I was afraid of was not doing my job, and I didn't even think about those bogeys out there shooting at us, and I always thought they were shooting at somebody else anyway.
Were you constantly then busy and preoccupied with getting the B-17s going where they needed to go?
Oh yes, absolutely. I would come home, and we had about 4 layers of clothes. We started out with electrified underwear and long johns that had electrical wiring in it to keep us warm, and I literally would perspire so much I could wring water out of them, and I would end up absolutely exhausted. I was it wasn't tension, but I just concentration all the time. So there wasn't a minute that I wasn't just producing it to the very best of my ability. Because if I was on course, well, I still had to figure that I knew that up ahead in 12 minutes we were going to make a right turn, and I had to warn everybody so they could get into formation for the proper turning and so on. So it was just terribly exhausting, and I'd come home or back to base, and I would be absolutely and completely dehydrated, and I was one of the people who didn't take his ration of whiskey, and I always gave it to somebody or traded it to somebody for something. But I would just absolutely drink every liquid that I could, water and milk and so on, just because I was so dehydrated from the tension of this sometimes 10-hour flight.
Describe being in this without going to a wide shot. Just what was it like to be in this sort of front room with the box seat of the mission, being able to look out and see across your engines to formations on the other planes on the other side, and sort of in this very critical position with a window on the world and a desk to work at?
Well, strangely enough, when you asked that question, not a single visual image came back to me. What came back was a fragrance, an aura. For some reason or other, an airplane radio had a special smell, and that smell was one of the things that made me sick. And so I'd come in, and so I can remember the smell of a radio in the B-17. So that was that, and I was sick so much of the time that whenever my bombardier could get out of the nose, he'd go back because the fumes would be so terrible. And I don't like to say all this kind of thing, but that's the way I thought. And but beyond that, I had no sense of claustrophobia. I think there were a lot of windows, and we could see a long ways on. I remember once I saw something 92 miles away. So there was a tremendous expanse. So I'm more conscious of what I saw through the windows, and particularly when we were over the overcast. And it was just a stunningly beautiful sight. The B-17 in flight is a gorgeous thing. Anyway, I called it, I wrote about it once, and I called it Gull Graceful and Pencil Slim, Pencil Slender, because they were just a beautiful thing. And in order to keep the groups together, the lead would be firing a flare, so you could see from 600 to 2,000 aircraft all in this gorgeous formation with 4th of July because of the flares, the yellow greens. Each group and each wing had a special flare. So you'd file your flare so they'd know how to make the rendezvous and come out, right? So that was significant. And then I was conscious of the equipment. So I would never be an artist because I don't have good visual memories. I know I could reach and get the drift meter, and I could reach and get the radio, and I could reach and get the oxygen, and I always had my my E6B computer at exactly the right place, and I always knew that the desk was never big enough because our charts were much larger. And I was conscious of the bombardier sitting up there and all the paraphernalia of the Norton bomb sight. Early on, my plane would usually have a machine gun on the left side or on the right side, and occasionally I'd use the thing, but I was a terrible gunner, and I always thought that if I made a mistake navigating at the expense of shooting some liftoff member guy, well, it would be a bad deal. So I finally had the nose guns taken out so that they wouldn't be even a temptation for a navigator. So I'm not conscious that when we did use them at first on Regensburg, for instance, I used up 3 boxes of shells. So, and as the shells came out of the belt and the spent cartridges came out, they were all over the floor. Just you couldn't walk because there were so many. I remember that, and I remember the way the bombardier sat up in front of me and was hunched over that. And I remember every time when he dropped the bombs, he'd raise his hand, his left hand, and say bombs away. And with 6,000 pounds or whatever it was our load, we'd jump up like that because of the lack of weight and the sense of exhilaration. And then somebody always said, "Well, let's get out of here," and so I'd give them the heading to get off to the rally point. And we always descended about 500 feet from the target near where we dropped the bombs to the rallying point, and your ears would pop and so on like that. I remember feeling cramped because I'm 6 feet tall, and there just wasn't room for a 6-foot person here, particularly since in the later years we just decided it was too much responsibility. I should say, we should. There's too much responsibility for one navigator. So we had a command navigator, the role I came to function, and then we had the crew navigator who did the dead reckoning, and they were extraordinarily good. And so then it was even more cramped.
Who was the person most injured or killed? Explain that.
Oh, strangely enough, and nobody ever could figure why, it was a navigator. It was.
Restate that so you pick up my question.
Yeah, okay. Of the 10, at first, 10 members of the crew, that is co-pilot and pilot and bombardier and so on, and the crew back to the tail gunner, there were 10 positions at first. On the statistics, the persons we lost the most was the navigator. And so it was bad enough to be in the 100th Bomb Group with all of the reputation for the fatalities and the vendetta that the Luft had against us. But here I was flying the position that was the worst. And it was so bad, in fact, that we constantly ran out of navigators, and we'd have to take a bombardier and teach him to be a navigator, and we called him a bombardier, and he would sit back here, and then we would take a gunner and teach him to just we called him a toggleier. And so we had to train people on the field. In fact, sometimes the gunners whom we trained to be toggleiers, we could commission right on the spot. And because all the bombardier behind everybody and behind the lead would do was toggle something, and everything would drop out. And so that it was because of that high fatality rate of navigation. I never could understand why. For one thing, we were most of our attacks were head on, but why wasn't it the bombardier or the co-pilot that got hit? Nobody ever knew.
If you had to describe the worst thing about a B-17 or its greatest fault, what would that be?
Being cramped, getting into this compartment. I couldn't get in the usual way now that I'm old. It was cramped, and I'm 6 foot, and most of the places you can't stand up, and you bang your head on a lot of you just bang your head all the time. The crampedness, but it's got a host of virtues that I don't even want to end on a negative note because it was such a grand aircraft.
Talk about the bomb load.
Well, that's something that my memory doesn't hold well on. And my memory, and this is, I have about a 20% degree of conviction on this one. I think that the biggest loads we had was 2 or 3 2,000-pound bombs, or some configuration that made 6,000 pounds. but I just don't remember. We had the demos, the big demolition. We had incendiaries. We had all kinds of different bombs, and a lot of times we had whole bunch of little tiny ones. Not little, but maybe 250 pounds, 500, something like that.
Why did you came in as an original, and
Yeah.
yet you stayed until the end of the war? How was it that you were
Well,
around for so long?
it wasn't heroism. I'm not like Rosie. Rosie saw it as his job to win the war. He had a kind of a nobility that I didn't have. But what did in the first place? At first, I flew with a crew, and so I would fly every time that the group flew. But then after my 12th mission, I only flew in the lead, and we only had our turn to lead ever so often. They just very systematically took turns leading. So at first then it began I would only fly every third mission, and then when I got really good, I only flew when we led the wing. And then I got really good at the end. I only flew when they flew the task force, and there were 75, or there were about 25 bomb groups in our division. So we only had the task force lead every 25 missions. So they began to stretch out, which was terrible on your morale because a crew would come, fly its mission in 5 weeks, and go home. And I'd make friends. So all my friends would either finish up or go home, and finish up and go home, or get shot down and be dead or be in POW. So it strung out, and then along toward the last, I did, pardon this, my lack of modesty perhaps, I got very good at training lead crews. And so it was decreed I should not fly my last 3 missions. Because when I flew the last 3 missions, then I could go home. And it's a long story, but I'm started on it. You can cut it out if you don't want to use it. But so I was stuck at 22 missions. Then way back when it was 25 was a tour, and so they stuck me at 22, and then it decreed. Then we found out that we were going to go to Russia, and I, with being the romantic and the naive kind of idealistic, I had flown on the longest mission to the north, which was Trondheim. I had flown the longest mission to the south, which was the Regensburg shuttle to Africa.
So this Russia shuttle mission came up, and
Yeah.
your mission count goal
Yeah.
was now 30. So
Okay. Well, actually, that wasn't yet a factor. The factor was I had 22 missions, and I was not permitted to fly because if I flew 3 more missions, I would get 25, and the tour would be over. So I was stuck. But then we learned we were going to do a Russia shuttle, that is, fly from leave England, bomb someplace near Berlin, and then instead of coming back, go on. And this was your window trimming because the Russians wanted to know to look at us. We wanted to show them how big we were and how good we were, and so on. And so I wanted to go on that mission. Now this is not what you're supposed to think about when you're trying to win a war. But I had been on the longest mission to the north, which was to Trondheim. I'd been the leader, and then I was on the longest mission to the south, to Regensburg, and then down to Africa. And here, now they were going to fly the longest mission they'd ever flown to the east, and I wanted to be the only person, as I subsequently became, the only person in the whole 8th Air Force who flew on the 3 longest missions, longest northeast and south. So I went to Jack Kidd, the operations officer, and said, "Look, Jack, I'll give me 2 more missions." I said, "I'll fly there. That's 23. I'll fly back. That's 24, and you can still hold me here because I will still have the 25th to fly." And so he finally let me do it, because I never was very good at low altitude navigation. It just went by too fast, and I wasn't good at pilotage. I mentioned earlier, but not having the best visual kind of perception of life, and so I put my 2 best navigators up in the lead ship, and I was the navigator in the high squadron lead, and so we went to Russia, and when we got there, half of the wing that half of the task force was demolished by being bombed on the ground. That's a wonderful Jeffrey story, but and if you want me to tell, I'll tell that later about Jeff. But anyway, and so that meant we only had half the task force. Most of us were badly hit. So instead of flying back and bombing in Germany, they decided they would give us an easy trip, which was to bomb someplace, a little town of ARAD, which was really not much of a target at all, and we'd bomb a target there and then go to Italy. So I flew 23 to Russia, 24 to Arad, and then we landed in Italy. Well, that's fine because we were going to fly from Italy back to the United States, and by then it was occupied France, and there wouldn't be a mission. But while we were there, the head of the 15th Air Force asked us if we wanted to fly a mission with them. So we flew a milk run of all milk runs. I didn't see a single bit of flak. I didn't see a single bit of fighter. But that was that made my 25th mission, and so that meant I was through, and because I'd flown 3 rather than 2, and excuse me, and I had all the way home I was just singing and elated, and it happened that about this time, they decided that once you were the rank of major or colonel, you were a professional and knew so much. Instead of going to home or rotating, they'd give you a job higher up. And so the rule was, if you were a major or lieutenant colonel, you took a job with U Staff or 8th Air Force Headquarters or something like that. And but I was a captain, so everything was fine. I'd finished my 25, and all the way home I was shouting. When I got close to Thorpe Abbott's, I called out to Jack Kidd on the free and clear in the air. I said, Colonel Kidd, this is Captain Crosby. No, this is Captain Crosby coming home with 25 missions. And he said, we'll welcome you home, Major, because I had been promoted while I was in Russia, and I was a major and couldn't go home. And so that's how. And I finally finished. So I finished the tour, and then that 25, when they increased the mission, they called it 30. I got credit for 30. I really only flew 25, but everybody said I had 30, and then I later flew 3 more, and so I got credit for 33 missions. But I did get to have a month home between my first and second tours. But I could have complained, and then there's another story how I could when Colonel Jeff came in, he brought in bunch of people to replace us, and he brought in somebody to replace me, and I could have gone home, but I elected not to.
Well, what was the hardest thing about navigating a bunch of B-17s flying in formation?
Well, only one navigator could navigate. For all the follow-up navigators, what they had to be able to do, the single pilot at each point they had to find was the tail of the plane up ahead, because it was to navigate, we had to dead reckon, and we had to have an absolutely carefully held ground indicated airspeed. It had to be exactly 150, and we had to hold a heading while the planes behind were jockeying around to hold information, and so the poor guys behind, their headings were all over the compass. Their ground speeds were from 140 to 180, their indicated airspeed and so on, and so they couldn't navigate. So only the lead navigator could navigate, and before we had radar, so we could see through the clouds. Before we had that, weather was the biggest thing.
The biggest problem.
Biggest problem, yeah.
Just it was hard for you to tell where you were.
That's right. We couldn't. We couldn't use radio. Couldn't use celestial. All we could do is try to figure out what the wind was and what the wind was doing to us and what our altitude was and our temperature, and so. We to look at the ground and find an intersection of a river or a coastline or something of that sort, and then locate it on the map was called pilotage. But if you were over the cloud, there was no pilotage, and so we just did a tremendous amount of guessing. On the longest mission to the north that I flew, I didn't see the cloud. I didn't see the ground. I didn't know where I was 90% of the time, but it just happened that the weather metro was prediction was good, and I got there. It was just sheer blind luck because it was so. We were completely unprepared. I have here an E6B computer. It's a what it is a round logarithmic slide rule and a geometric kind of thing to show. And this is what I used for what I want to say. Most planes now they have radar, they have radio, they have LORAN, they have just Omni. They have Stealth has a whole building back on the ground telling you how to navigate. And this is what I use. I use this to navigate 2,000 aircraft. And we were not well trained. We were doing an impossible job.
Let's go back for a moment. You were saying that the Luftwaffe quickly figured out where to target their attacks.
Yeah.
On which airplane and why? What was their objective?
Okay. The first, at first, they believed that the blindest spot was the rear, and the attacks were from the rear and the sides. And then they began to have such a healthy respect for the tail gunners, they began to look elsewhere. And then they just realized, frankly, that the way to stop the bombing is to get the lead plane. So a lot of them were from 12 o'clock, and a lot of them are off the sides and so on. So they wanted to get the lead ship, and they knew that the squadron leader was the best flyer, and they knew that if you get three ships, get the three squadron leads, the plane there was just nothing to do, and the planes would have to filter back and fly with other formation. We had procedures for fill in when the fronts were shot down, but they were the one to get. And then when we got the bombardier double droop snoot, they call it, the two guns in the front, they were a very good gun, and the bombardiers got good, and so it was less bad. But for a long time, when we had the B-17F with no turret gun in the front, we lost a lot of lead ships.
You were not on any of the Dresden raids in February '45.
No.
But the 8th Air Force did participate on the daytime bombing on Ash Wednesday, February 14th, which also happened to be Valentine's Day, following on two previous bomb runs by the RAF the night before. So Dresden was bombed 3 times in 12 hours or something. Just as a member of a B-17 American bomber crew, what was your reaction to the firestorm bombing of Dresden?
Let me go sideways on that one for a while, because it can be a little bit more realistic. Tom Jeffrey and I were the lead of a task force, and we bombed Stuttgart, which is also a beautiful city and not well known for being a great target. Not a lot of command of military there. No important military targets. Not the kind of development. And but we had a quote good mission. We came back, and I was sitting in the officers' club having dinner, and Axis Sally came on the radio and said, "Well, the 8th Air Force was out in full force. They bombed Stuttgart and left 5,000 people dead and 25,000 people homeless." And just then Tom Jeffrey walked in, and he said, "What do you think of that, Harry?" And I didn't know how to answer, because I was a good kid. I was a Boy Scout, and I went to church, and I was sensitive, and I didn't like to kill bugs and rodents and that kind of thing. And here we were destroying the whole town. And I didn't know what to say. And he said, "Well, Harry, we did our job." And he walked out. And were we hypnotizing ourselves? I don't know. I can't say that we were we were inflamed with the idea of winning the war. I didn't know much about the Holocaust. I didn't know much about the treachery that was in the high ranks. I didn't. It was more a routine, abstract. My country was at war, and uh, and we did our job. It was like that. I wasn't mad at Germans, and I've seen lots of German Luftwaffe since then. We've got along fine. I have no animosity toward them at all. So it was a kind of an abstraction that I think the young people can do, and but it was there was no nobility involved or bravery. It was our job, and to fail was worse than succeeding. And so when we heard about the bad targets, and we didn't hear very much. I don't know whether it was a filter, a screening it wasn't. I bet it wasn't in Stars and Stripes or Yank Magazine or so on. But we didn't know about it. But if I suspect that if Accident Sally had said about this firebombing and so on, I wouldn't have believed her. I was. It was all right then to be patriotic, or I would have thought, well, they say that there are no important targets, but there really are. It was that state of mind that we had, and it was a kind of protection. And when my people, my friends, graduated and from the war and went out and became citizens, they stayed married. When we went to the town of Sioux City, Iowa, it was the last place we were going to be, and in that one little month we were there, 28 members of my squadron married girls they met there. Of that 28, 27 of them lasted. One divorce. Three people in my squadron just recently celebrated their 50th anniversary. Jean and I had met in college, and when she died, we only lasted for 37 years. But it was we had a state of mind of being good people, and when we got out of this horrible war where I wiped out 5,000 people in 25 houses, we were still good people. I was very involved against Vietnam, and it somehow we did not become war lovers. We did not become brutes. We didn't beat our wives or be bad to our kids.
Couple questions.
Yeah.
About the sort of change overall that you saw from beginning to end.
Oh yeah.
Now you were there for the entire time of the 100th bomb.
That's right.
How is it different at the end from what it was?
Okay, it was dramatically different. In the first place, the enemy was the Luftwaffe. Our escort hardly got past the French coast or the Dutch coast. And the Luftwaffe was how we lost our plane. And then particularly when we got P-51s, and they went with us, then we destroyed the Luftwaffe. We would go a whole mission and not see any of the German aircraft. And then from then on it was flak. And so you talk to somebody who was there early, like an original, and he talks about the fighters. But you're going to talk to somebody who was there late in the war, he talks about the flak. And the flak was terrible. And people ask me which was worse, and I say they're both worse. And when you go over Ruland or Stuttgart or Merseburg or Gelsenkirchen or Berlin, it was though you could just walk on the flak. It was just these black poppings of these missiles, and you'd see them, and then there would be a hole there and a hole there and a hole there, and you'd maybe be a fragment there, and you'd think, how on earth did I escape this? So they were both there. So there were those two things. There was that, and of course the G was better than the F because of a number of reasons, but I think the difference between fighters early and flak was the difference. They got and at first, incidentally,
Sorry, what? I do want you to tell me about the difference between the length of mission.
Okay.
Okay, so if you pick it up with the other.
Okay, the difference between the early part of the war and the latter part of the war, the 43 versus 45 and 44, was the missions were longer. We just, without when I can't remember the exact date, but when we went to Emden and I saw all those gorgeous P-51s, I thought maybe for the first time I thought I'm going to get through because they could go, they went to Russia with us. They couldn't go to even to Regensburg on August 17th, 1943, but when we went to Berlin, they went with us, and they were magnificent. They had the wing tanks, and you'd be watching them, and if you could see a glitter of the light, you knew that they were dropping their wing tanks, which means that they saw bogeys, and we'd tune in on them, and we would hear them yell with glee as they'd go after those guys, and the 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 affection, the bond between the little friend and the big friend, beggars description, because these guys would stick with you. There were any number of times that a plane was coming back alone, and a little friend would come up and say, "Big friend, I'm with you," and so he'd fly around and protect that wounded B-17. And there are any number of times when the little friend stayed with him so long that he ran out of gas and went into the drink, and we told Air Sea Rescue where the little friend was down, and you could see the Air Sea Rescue coming out before we were out of sight, and so that was the difference. And incidentally, if in this time, all my talk, there's a feeling of excitement and romance and mythology. It's there. My friends that I made then saved my life. Ed Blakely saved my life any number of times. And John Brady did, and Howard Hamilton, and these people I knew I could depend on. They were the friends of all friends. It was the time in our life when we were doing what we knew, what we thought was right, and so those friendships make you accept the fact, as horrible as war is, that it's the ultimate male bonding experience. Maybe it'll be different now with the women in the service, but it was a terrible thing, but you just had not to miss it.
To what extent did this B-17 type of aircraft save you?
Oh, 100%. I'm absolutely sure that if I had been in a lesser aircraft or had a less good pilot, I would not have come back 10 times because we were always hit. As a matter of fact, the reason that the plane had its name, Justice Snapping, was that Blakely's crew was hit so many times and came back alone that they would say, well, there was the 100th, and there was Blakely's crew coming behind Justice Snapping at its heels. And so the plane came to be known as Justice Snapping because it came back alone. The B-17 was a magnificent aircraft. You could lose 3 engines and fly home. You could lose your vertical stabilizer, almost all of it, and fly home. You could lose an aileron and fly home. You could have a hole in the fuselage as big as heaven, men could walk through. I think you could drive a Jeep through some of the holes that you have, and they'd still get home. So it was forgiving for pilots. Pilots would have 500 hours and still be able to fly. In the entire history that I know of the B-17, only once did it go into a tailspin. In fact, when I went into tailspin, they didn't know whether to court-martial the guy for letting it get into it or to give him a DFC for getting it out of it. And but everything that anybody says about the Flying Fortress, the B-17, I come down with 100%. Magnificent aircraft.
Just a couple final points. You all were practically kids fighting this war. Talk about that.
Well, when I give talks about World War II after my book came out, occasionally I say, just to show what we were, just to get a point of that, think of somebody in your mind who's 26, and they think, yeah, my son's 26. Yeah, gee whiz, I wish he'd get a job. I wish he'd get through school. I wish he'd make up his mind. I wish he'd decide which girl he was going to marry. And I'd say, my group commander was 26. Tom Jeffrey was 26. He was a full colonel, and he was in charge of 3,000 men. He was making decisions 10 times a day that involved people's lives. Not only was he a business manager of his group, he was always the number one commander. So we were kids. My my bombardier, my first bombardier, Howard B. Hamilton, was 17 when he went in, and he fudged his age a little bit, and so he was commissioned when he was 18. So he was the second lieutenant when he was 18. And when you 18 sounds like 18, but if you think of somebody who's 18 or 24 the way I was, well, you just realize we were kids. And I think that's why we did some of the harem-scarum things that we did, the tricks we played on each other, and the jokes, and this is I remember one time, I don't know whether this will show, but we got a new crew, and one of the bombardiers went around, his neck was like this, and we felt so sorry for the guy, but we kept wondering, how could a pilot pass a physical with a neck like that? And for about, we eventually, about a couple of weeks, we knew the guy, and one of us says, what's wrong with your neck? Why do you carry your neck that way? He said, I got tired of carrying it this way. So for 2 whole weeks, he carried that joke on to try to get somebody to ask him what it was neck like that. So there was nothing wrong with his neck. He just wanted to pull a joke on the way. I could spend the rest of the time telling about these dumb jokes people pull in, and some of them during the missions. When if you got this much time, when Tom Jeffrey came, he knew that the 100 did not have good leaders at that time, and he knew that we were a disciplined outfit, so he brought a whole bunch of people.
I'm sorry, you said a disciplined outfit.
Undisciplined, boy, I don't mean that.
Start over. So who came in?
When Tom Jeffrey.
I'm sorry, just to position myself, just one moment.
Good for you. When Tom Jeffrey became the new group commander, he came because our previous leadership had not been good. We were an undisciplined outfit. We were notorious, raunchy, and so he knew that he was going to have some pretty severe changes. And he brought in a whole group of captains and majors who were walking around ready to take over our job. Somebody replaced the air exec. Somebody replaced the ground exec. Somebody replaced the S2 officer. Somebody replaced all of them. One bang, 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 all of them. But the guy who was supposed to replace me, boy, I was glad because I was going to get to go home. And so I thought, boy, lucky me. And I won't use his name. I'll call him, say, Leafy Hill, which is sort of halfway like his name. But when I thought, well, gee, I better take Leafy up on a check ride. And I went up, and the guy was in the air. He was nuts. he didn't know left from right. He was just terrible. And how on earth he'd become a captain, I don't know. And maybe something had happened to him in the war. And then I put him on a mission, and he flew with a crew by the name of Terminello with a navigator named Stu Jellison. When they came back, they were wild. Said, this guy is nuts. He's just insane. There's something wrong. He kept seeing bogeys and nobody else saw them. And he kept yelling new corrections that didn't fit in. And in fact, they missed the target because they went off. Because he went off on a bad heading, and so they said, I'll never fly with this guy again. And so here I was, boy, I have a dilemma. If I stay here and don't use him, I won't get to see my new baby and my wife but if I stay here, this guy's terrible. And so I didn't know what to do. So I went on a 2-day pass to think it over. And when I came back, Leafy was gone. And I said to Stu Jellison, what happened, who was my assistant, what happened to Leafy? And Leafy said, don't ask. But I did ask. And so I went to Terminello, the pilot, and said, what happened to Leafy Hill? I'm being careful not to say his right name, proper name. And he said, don't ask. But a couple of nights later in the officers' club, I found his co-pilot who had a drink or two and was a little bit loose-tongued, and I asked, well, what had happened was that in my absence, Jellison had put Leafy on another flight with Terminello's crew, and they had it all worked out, so that about halfway through the flight, the pilot shook the airplane, and it just really hit all the controls, and it really bumped around. And he said, we're bad hit. Prepare to abandon ship." And then he hit the alarm bell, and one guy went out. It was Leafy, and and so that was what happened to Leafy, and that solved my problem. And whenever I told when that story got around, that was funny. Because we were young and we had to laugh before we went bananas ourselves.
Let's pause for 1 second. You know what I'd like